Okay, I think we're back in business. Superintendent. ESSA. No.
We'll do that in a minute.
They're still working on it.
Lot
Okay,
going
it's
on
up to you.
Okay, thank you, Chair Huntsman. Thank you, Board. A lot of work has gone into this moment today to bring our draft ESSA plan to you. And as you know, we took some time to go through this. We're happy that we did, instead of jumping right out of the gate and submitting a plan to the federal government for funding. We wanted to take the time we needed, and things have changed. It's been an iterative process at the federal level as well. So we feel like we're well poised and have had lessons learned. And we're still very confident in our approach by using the strategic plan as the basis of this application for federal funding. So we're going to go through and give you the highlights. You have all had access to the plan, and we appreciate those of you who have had questions that you've reached out and gotten those answered ahead of time, but it doesn't preclude you from asking questions today. So the three things, we just want to give you a refresher on the development of the plan with a timeline, and again, what that means for us. As you know, it went out for public comment, so we took those public comments very seriously, and we want to give you an overview of the changes to the plan based on that feedback. And then last but not least, well, the summary of the feedback as well, but we want you to see the changes that resulted from the feedback. So those are the three main things that we'll be going over today. So if you look at the if you look at the process, and you'll recall that we kind of gave you updates along the way, and the former board determined a start date of really working on the plan back in August of 2016. So we divided and conquered in terms of work groups. We looked at the parts of the strategic plan, the funding sources, and then divided up to look at very specific pieces of the plan. So those work groups took place, engaging various stakeholder groups in the work groups, and those took place through December of 2016. And then starting in January, we were coupling this and working with accountability legislation. And again, not trying to veer off in 3 or 4 different directions like some states have done, but we really wanted to stick with our plan and our strategic plan and build this around our new accountability as well. As we got through the session and saw that the legislation that came forward was really informed by the board, which we appreciated, we then began writing the plan and putting specificity into the plan. We then pushed that plan back out at your direction and vetted the plan with various stakeholders. And then over the course of the last couple of months, we've been getting the feedback, responding to the feedback, and making adjustments. So that's the overall timeline. We started talking about the plan certainly before August of 2016, but under the board's direction, you can see before you the entire duration of the process. So one of the things that you've heard us talk about very publicly and privately, we're consistent in saying that this is a funding source to fulfill our state responsibility. And this is in state law, and it's in the board's strategic plan, but really focused on ensuring that all students have equitable educational opportunities. And those targeted title funds go specifically towards that end. We've talked a lot about the funding and the amount of federal funding, state funding, local funding, et cetera. This is a graphic that represents that. And so if you think about, I think one of the things we always want to point out that this ESSA plan really covers title funds of about $123 million. That does not include IDEA federal funding that comes to us for child nutrition programs, but the money that we're talking about is that $123 million that covers title programs. And I really can't read that.
Oh, really?
Okay, I'm watching for lights too, so I'm not seeing any questions. So
Okay, so this is this you? Mm-hmm. You're driving.
Well, sure.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go for it. You're younger than I am, and you can see better.
Sorry, it's a little smaller than I hoped. So Tiffany Stanley, Policy Advisor with the board. So essentially this just lays out each of the title programs that are contained within the ESSA state plan, as well as the purpose for each and the impact of each. So this is sort of just highlighting Superintendent Dixon's earlier point that the purpose of ESSA and really the funds that are provided through it are to provide for these equitable opportunities for these different groups of students. So students from low-income families, students who are highly mobile, students who are at risk of dropping out, or who have dropped out or are transitioning from institutionalization. And then, of course, increasing academic achievement of all students through high-quality educators. And then you have students who are limited English proficient, students who live in high-poverty areas or in rural areas, and then students who are experiencing homelessness. So those are just sort of the groups of students and sort of the funds that are made available to ensure equitable opportunities for those.
Just a quick question.
Yes.
You have 147 LEAs, so I'm assuming you're using all 41 districts, and then are the balanced charters? Mm-hmm. That's what you mean by the 140s. Thank you.
Okay, please continue.
So just another quick reminder before we jump into the changes, recent changes in the plan from the version that went out for public comment. Our approach to the state plan has been really to address the minimum requirements. So that general language can maximize our flexibility so we don't pigeonhole ourselves into certain things. And then really where we will get more specific is in the board's strategic plan. So the changes, just to highlight, so on board docs is both a version 2 and a version 3. Version 3 is for your consideration today. Version 2 is the version that was submitted to the governor for his consideration and input, as well as the version discussed with the legislature. Version 3, as we've continued to make technical edits as well as incorporate stakeholder feedback, is the version that you're considering today. So just to highlight the changes from the version that went out for public comment, that was version 2, and the changes there are we added highlights of each title program to the executive summary. We added a summary of the stakeholder feedback received through the public comment period, including responses to questions and recommendations that came through the public comment period, which Emily will be reviewing with you a little bit more specifically. And then we made non-substantive changes based on new information regarding plan requirements. So an example of this is that we moved proficiency on science assessments into the description of the school quality indicator in the plan. So it's a non-substantive change, but something that the plan required that we didn't realize in version 1. So it's things like that. Then we made clarifying changes based on stakeholder feedback. I'm happy to give examples of any of these, but maybe I won't. Yes? Okay. So one feedback was that we should reference the opportunity that 2017 General Session SB 220 offers to allow for each school to self-report to school quality indicators. That's something that we decided we could do. So we just added that as a clarifying change. Another clarifying change we made is to add language describing the comprehensive needs assessment that's conducted in low-performing schools. To clarify that language wasn't meant to imply that the state board would exert influence over LEA employment policies. We just had to add one word to make that clear. So things like that. So this last piece, changes to the methodology for identifying and exiting low-performing schools. This has been something that we have been spending a lot of time on over the summer to ensure that we are that we have one accountability system in the state and that we have one comprehensive school improvement system in the state, and that we're not identifying schools for improvement through the state turnaround program and separately doing something different for federal purposes. We have one school improvement system that provides a lot of clarity to the field and and a lot of efficiencies, and really is what we should be doing. So I'm happy to provide an overview on what's in the plan regarding that, if that would be helpful. Okay. So essentially, two groups of schools would be identified. One group is low-performing schools overall, and use the state accountability system to identify that group. And the approach will be to identify all schools who are assigned the lowest rating in the school's accountability system for improvement. And what that enables us to do is have a criteria as opposed to a normative measure, which depends on how other schools in the state are performing. Essentially, all schools that fall below that cut score, that criteria that that recently we went through a process to establish, that standard setting process, would be identified for improvement. So that's the process for identifying those schools. And then to exit, the school would need to not meet that criteria anymore. So instead of the exit criteria being determined based on how other schools are performing or being a moving target, it would be that fixed criteria. And the field really emphasized that point that what gets you in should get you out, and that should be very clear and transparent. One thing to clarify there is that we may need, because we do want just one system of school improvement, we may need a couple of statutory tweaks to the state turnaround law to enable us to do that approach, but the plan is written flexibly enough to allow for that. And then the other group of schools that would be identified are schools with consistently underperforming student groups. So this would help us to ensure that the performance of historically underperforming student groups won't be hidden by the performance of students overall in a school. So these schools are just identified to develop a plan for any student groups for which they're identified, and the LEA approves that plan. That is not, the state isn't involved in those planning efforts. And those schools would be identified essentially by any student group whose performance overall would meet that same criteria as the low-performing schools in that other group would be identified. So, any questions on that?
Yes, Board Member Cannon?
So it sounds like you're looking at disaggregated information to, you said that the performance of a majority would not be able to mask the low-performing groups. Do you have any problem with N numbers being too low to get to those kids who are underperforming?
So our N size for accountability purposes has been set at 10, which we have determined is the N size that ensures student privacy, but also doesn't enable or maximizes transparency so that we can identify those students.
And that size isn't too large to prevent them being masked?
10 is kind of the minimum. Mm-hmm.
I'm not seeing any other questions or comments.
Okay. So then the changes from version 2 to version 3, there were just a couple of additional clarifications or changes to the methodology that I just described for identifying and exiting low-performing schools. And those were to the methodology for identifying schools with low-performing student groups that I just described. Another change, a couple of other changes that were made were to eliminate superfluous language from Title II, Part A. So specifically, there's a question in the state plan template regarding our current licensing structure, which we know is likely to change. So rather than describe the current licensing structure, we're just simply stating that a Utah educator's license may be obtained through traditional university preparation programs or through alternative routes, as defined in statute and rule, and that the board has a licensing task force in place to, and that changes may be coming. So that was one change. We also added clarifying changes based on stakeholder feedback again. So examples of this are that we added language highlighting requirements to, for this one, actually, what we did, one of the examples is that we added a description of the home language survey to clarify that that is used to identify students who may be potentially designated as English learners, but it's not actually used to identify students for English learner services. So there's a separate assessment for that. So it's things like that, just clarifying clarifying changes, clarifying questions.
Question. You said home visits?
No, it's called a home language survey.
Home
That's
language,
used for
okay,
English
thank you.
learners. Yeah. And then lastly, in response to stakeholder feedback, we made several changes. We added language highlighting requirements to inform and consult with parents about title programs. We added language regarding current state efforts around trauma-informed care. We added language regarding development of a transition plan for recently arrived English learners. And we added some emphasis on the role of the teacher in developing teacher leader programs. Any questions?
Any questions
On
from
some
board
of
members?
this. This is just giving a flavor of the changes and examples of the broader changes that were made.
Oh, here we go.
Well, I'm
Vice
just
Chair
wondering
Wallace.
when you want us to ask specific questions about like page 25, whatever. So I'm kind of waiting until your presentation's over,
Oh, sure.
unless you want me to, because trying to fit it in, I don't know that I'm doing.
Yeah, I think it's fine to ask them now.
Well, it's not with what you're talking
Okay.
Okay, well,
Okay.
maybe we should get to it. I'm sure we're going to have some questions. So board members, if you have specifics on certain lines, let's save them to the end and
Okay.
make some notes. So, but it's good to have a pause on per section, and
Yep.
then we'll be sure and address those questions.
Okay.
Okay, so as Superintendent mentioned, we started one of the final process portions of the public feedback earlier this summer. So in early June, we published a website that had the plan on it. It was a website completely dedicated for ESSA information. That website is still up if you would like to go to it. I've sent you emails, but just as a reminder, it's uen.org/ESSA. The website's up. It has the latest version of the plan, but it does not have the public comment survey any longer. So after we published the website, we did distribute the information through a press release and through emails to superintendents and charter administrators and social media. So we received public comments between June 7th and July 7th in that 30-day period. We had 126 respondents to the online survey, and each of them were asked to respond to the individual titles, and so some chose to give comments on just one, some chose to comment on some, and some to all of them. So in total, we received 674 comments. In addition to the comments that we got on the public survey, we received two formal comments from organizations. So it was from the Access Committee that is your advisory group, and then I believe from UEA. Yeah. All right, do you want to move to? So a couple of weeks ago, we sent you an email that had all of the feedback that was incorporated in a document. So you may have looked at that, but just to go over some of it again, the feedback that was incorporated into the plan was based on applicable comments. And so the first step was to go through the comments and decide about feasibility and scope. Feasibility, an example, would be something that was requested that may conflict with state law, so that was considered maybe not feasible. Scope was something that was unrelated to ESSA. We also noted what was already current practice that we had been working on, and we noted what was something that was going to be better handled at the LEA level or was already being handled at the LEA level. And then finally, there were the comments that we did use to incorporate the feedback. So some of the outside the scope comments or comments that we decided were better left to LEA discretion included the importance of school libraries and librarians, the use of title funds for specific purposes, and incorporating cultural competence into educator licensing requirements and school-based clinical experiences. So that gives you an idea of how we divided it. You probably, if you would like that document emailed to you again, we can send that in addition.
That's it.
So now would be the time for questions.
Okay, board members. So that concludes 100% of your report. Okay. Vice Chair Ellis.
So, Tiffany, the question I asked you earlier about the math, did you get an answer to that? So basically, there's a provision in here that says, are you allowing 8th grade students to be exempt from taking an assessment if they're taking a high school course? And I just wanted to see if you got so the question was, are we allowing it? Is that by statute if we're not? And anyways.
So my understanding, based on talking with our assessment and accountability staff, is that essentially the question asks for, it would require that we offer 8th graders assessments based on grade level. And my understanding is that we don't automatically give all 8th graders the same assessment. We give them the assessment that's aligned to the course they took. So because the question relies on that, it's essentially not applicable. So the answer became no to both questions in the template.
Okay, follow up.
Well, I just want to make sure that I'm clear. So if a student was taking a high school course, they would receive an assessment for a high school course, not for an 8th grade course. Thank you.
Further comments? Okay.
Oh, I had.
Oh, I'm looking for, there we go. Board Member Bolter.
On page 29 on assessments, it says they will administer an assessment that is predictive of a student's success on the ACT to students 9 and 10. We haven't come up with an assessment though that does that, or do we?
Yeah, so the language that's in there is the language that's in the plan, is the language that's in the statute, which does require that the assessment that's administered in grades 9 and 10 be predictive
So
of
what is
student
that
success.
assessment?
SAGE. So
It's predictive.
of a student's success on the ACT.
We have actual document like that's been validated.
It's the motion that was made and passed as a board. You made that decision. So this is reflecting the decision that you made.
Oh, so we're saying that we're giving SAGE, and I just thought that we were just voting at that time to just offer either SAGE, or if I'd known that we were saying that this is predictive of ACT, I would have been like, no, that's not true.
Okay.
So you're not
Superintendent.
necessarily saying it's predictive. We're reflecting the language that's in statute. But you as a board made the choice to go away from Aspire 9 and
Right.
10, which
So we're
left you with
saying
SAGE.
SAGE is predictive, though. That's what we're saying, according to page 29.
They're
That language right there.
Yes, and it's essentially because they're requesting that, and we haven't engaged in a full-on study, if that's what you're saying. You're asking
Right.
for, where's that data? But ours are aligned with our standards, and we believe our standards, as staff, we would say our standards are predictive in that they are preparing kids for college and careers, which is what ACT is predictive of. So in that sense, we would say that they're aligned.
Board Member Reby.
Thank you, Chair. I've received a few emails that say that we are requiring students to take SAGE in order to get into AP and honor classes, and they're stating that it's in this. So my understanding is that you still can't opt out of SAGE or a summative exam, and that the LEA is choosing to administer another type of measurement in order to predict if the child, to ascertain if they can be into an AP or honor class. And I'm asking this only to clarify many emails that I have received about this.
Yeah, so I think what the concern or the comments are regarding is the proposed changes to Rule 277404 that Standards and Assessment Committee considered yesterday, and that will be reviewed when the Standards and Assessment Committee provides their overview.
Okay, I'm looking for,
Chair, if I may go
Yes.
back and just address Member Bolter's question again. We have lots of helpers whose fingers are helpful during testimony. And I think one of the important points that I missed is that any standardized assessment, and this is from an assessment research perspective, any assessment with scale scores can be correlated to performance on another assessment. So where we have the scale scores in SAGE, that's one of the corollary elements that I should have mentioned.
okay. Further comments? Vice Chair Ellis?
Can you explain on page 31, the calculation of the 25% of lowest performing, are they double counted? I'm trying to understand that calculation.
Yeah, so the accountability system includes an indicator for, so we have both growth of all students and then growth of the lowest performing 25% of students in a school. And the thinking there is to encourage schools, all schools have a lowest performing 25% of students. So to encourage those schools to focus on improving the performance and growth of those students. So it's essentially just, pulling out and drawing attention to.
Sorry, a follow-up.
Follow up?
So is that in rule somewhere?
That's in statute.
That's in statute?
Yep, that's in SB 220. It
Okay,
describes.
so this was just,
Yeah,
all right. Well, then my concern needs to go there.
okay.
Further questions, comments? Vice Chair Ellis?
This is a heavy topic, so yes, I
Hey, I'm
apologize.
not.
So,
This
no,
is
I know,
big.
I just want to apologize. So, so last night on our way out the door, Superintendent Dixon asked me a question, and I was busy until 11:30, so I didn't get to respond. I was going to send you an email about one of the emails that one of our local board members sent out some information to people and talked about some concerns with non-cognitive factors. And so I called her and asked her to clarify what she was speaking about. And I didn't get that to you, but she wasn't doing, so a word search wouldn't find it because one of the concerns has to do with the 21st Century Learning Centers, and that we have that in our plan and using that kind of as a measure of our growth or success, but it's measuring things that aren't necessarily cognitive. They aren't about academics per se. They're other parts of a child's well-being. And also there's a part in here, and I don't have the page number, about discipline. And that we're using that. And so anyways, just to answer that question, those were some of where that verbiage came from about non-cognitive factors. And I would have to agree that I think that we need to stick to academics, even if the federal government's asking us about some of the things, that's where our focus should be.
Okay. Do you want to address the 21st Learning Century?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's specific. Okay, there's some specific funding that's tied directly to 21st Century Learning Centers, and those are actually, when we think about that's funding for after-school programs, and it's tutoring and other supports like STEM programs that tie directly to academics. So I know there's a lot out there about 21st Learning Centers, but that's an actual stream targeted at support for students with a lot of risk factors in I shouldn't say after school, but out of school spaces or places.
Yep, and so I think I found maybe the couple of references that that were of concern, and essentially it relates to disciplinary data or attendance data. So those would be two of the non-academic pieces of data that are currently collected. So disciplinary data like suspensions and expulsions and referrals, and then of course attendance information. The disciplinary data is something that's required to be collected by both, I think, the federal and state. And the references are just about that. So it's not necessarily that we would collect more information. It's just affirming that this is information that we collect, and that it, in regard to 21st century, it's one of the goals of the program that was listed is that in addition to academic outcomes, that you'd also see attendance improve. So.
Is there more? Yes, there is.
There is.
Okay, I'm just looking for the light, but it's hiding behind that
Sorry,
water bottle.
I just pulled it
But
close.
but I can see it. Okay.
So going back to these non-cognitive indicators, there's a part in there, and the problem is that we're bound by statute. I don't feel bound by the federal government because we don't have to say yes to their funds. But we are bound by legislation, and so that's why I want to define what clearly where we're just inserting what we're bound to do by statute. Anyway, so the discipline data, but then we talk about in that same area the data warehouse and the early warning systems, and I think that's of concern. So that's all in statute where we have to have these early warning systems and things where we're collecting social emotional behavior indicators basically for non-cognitive data, and that's in our document, but that's based on statute, correct?
Yeah, there was legislation that was passed last session regarding implementing early warning systems, and that's what this language is referring to.
Any other comment? I have one. While people are gathering their thoughts, I really appreciate all the work that went into this. This is quite a document. The hindsight, and I don't know if we can move forward with it, is on the finance side, we have a thing called the color of money. And in this plan, I'm not sure how we could put this together unless you change the ink, color of the ink, is how it would be nice for me to know how much of this is in statute, exactly in statute, and then for the reader, it would mean something different. But I'm not given direction because we need to approve this plan and move it forward. But I'm just wondering, after today, I don't know how much effort that would go into it, but I think it would help a lot of Utahns and people that have concern to know how much of this is already in statute, because there's this perception this is just all federal overreach and shove it down our throat kind of mentality. So is there a way to kind of mitigate that concern of mine, or to have that separation, Superintendent?
Chair Hudson, we can give you a summary document probably in the next couple of weeks that just can highlight where the statutory language is in the plan. I would include with that board rule or board request that you've made, and then just purely federal mandates. We can easily do that.
Yep, and one thing to kind of add to that is that Title I Part A especially, so that's the school improvement and accountability, and it also includes questions around school safety. Those, on almost every page, state law is referenced. So state law really is a guiding factor in that title. Some of the others, when it's a really small grant program or something like that, and there's a lot of flexibility in those grant programs, and so then that's kind of been the approach. But
And that is the bulk of the funding as well.
yeah, Title I.
Okay. Vice Chair Ellis?
Thank you. I want to echo what the chair said, because I am very thankful for the work and the conversations that you've been willing to have with me on this issue. So I do appreciate that. I don't want that to go unsaid. And I also anyways, this is a big undertaking, and I really do, I know that it took a lot of work. So I have a question about the opt-out rule and the 95% provision in there. And so I had it pulled up, and now it looks like I scrolled past it. But the language in there, we're basically just saying that it'll be on their report card. But I'm wondering if any board members would consider saying, you know what, we don't need to follow this requirement because this is a place where the federal government is overstepping their bounds according to the Constitution, because our state allows parents the opportunity to opt out of testing, and I don't think that we necessarily need to say, yes, we will put this on a report card, because as I listened yesterday to in law and licensing to one of the charter schools come to us telling us how they're going to try to get their opt-out number smaller. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that philosophy, because I'm not trying to please a 95% rule by the federal government. I'm trying to honor state statute and a parent's right to opt out.
Superintendent?
So it is on the top of page 47. Yep.
Yeah. So it's addressed on the top of page 47 for those listening in. I would just,
I like how you wrote it.
yeah, if I could just comment on that a bit, just taking us back to when we were having these conversations during the session around the accountability language being changed. The education community did come forward and actually wanted this as part of the report card, so that as you're looking at various measures, especially assessment, that they also want the opt-out number reflected, not as a negative or positive, but just to clearly state that on the report card, so that that was also transparent to the public along with their scores. So I just put that out there, that was the request that was made at the time during the legislation.
Right.
Okay.
And so it did end up actually in the legislation too. So this, yeah.
I don't have them on memory.
I know.
It's tough. Vice, let's see, who is it?
Cummins.
I've seen a light. Okay,
Yes.
there is the light behind the water bottle. Man, these water bottles are hiding the lights today.
Thank you, Chair. With the opt-out, I know that there's been heavy pressure to be put on the states to limit the opt-out on a national level. And if it comes through the education community, that might reflect, again, that they want the opt-out gone. And that concerns me. I know that there's many that want it gone, and there's talk of getting rid of it every session since we've implemented it. So with this language, I think it would say, look, we can do it. We need to do it. We need to support the state plan and rescind the opt-out. Excuse me. That's why I bring my water bottle. So I would almost like to see it removed, but I know it's in statute, and maybe that's something we need to look at statute-wise and approach them, because I think we're sending two different messages, one to the community and one to the parents, and I think we're going to have a huge conflict here pretty soon,
Okay.
to go one way or the other.
Board Member Reby?
Regards to opt-out, I think it's really a benefit for our communities to have that ability to opt out. I think it's interesting to see what the opt-out rate is when we have a report card and we have many opt-outs. Our report cards aren't reflective of what's maybe going on in our schools. And I think reporting the opt-outs is a tool for us to renegotiate where our education system is going. I'd like to know how many people are opting out, because when I look at a report card, I don't know. And so if that's high, then we need to reflect upon that and maybe change the way we're thinking.
Board Member Lear?
And this is a question to Sid or Tiffany, but about Lisa and Elise's question. If we were to remove that section from this report, what would be the consequences? Is it just automatically the report isn't accepted? Does it mean we would lose the ESSA money? Do we get some kind of a, I'm just wondering, because
And we're laughing
I
because
wanted-
we're laughing because you'd like a concrete answer.
and and maybe it's an I don't, I'm okay with an I don't.
Yeah, I'm not sure we know, other than we're pretty certain that they would come back and say we have an incomplete plan if we don't address it.
All right. And that's helpful.
Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I would like to move that we approve the Every Student Succeed Act state plan.
Second.
We have a motion. Did you get the second? Any further discussion? Vice Chair Ellis?
Thank you. I just wanted to restate how appreciative I am of all of the work that has gone into this. And what I really appreciate is the genuine move to not go above and beyond what is a minimum requirement. So I really do appreciate that. With that said, it goes against everything I campaigned on and stood for, but I really do appreciate that we have taken the approach to say, you know, this is where we stand. And I would like to see our states, I would like to see our energy expended on really pushing the legislature to fund this 6.25% gap, instead of asking the federal government to do so, but really to make that a priority, that we say, look, we have a majority of legislators that say that they don't believe the Department of Ed at a national level should even exist, and yet they're not willing to stand behind those words and actually put the money where, you know, their words are. And I would like to spend effort, instead of saying mother may I to the federal government, is to push in the legislature to act on those words. And so I just wanted that kind of on the record.
Board Member Cannon, then Board Member Lear.
Oh.
Board
I
Member
just have a
Cannon.
question. So you have to submit this very soon, correct? What's the date again?
18th.
The 18th. And then what moving forward, what input do you expect to get from the feds coming back on whether or not the plan is approved, or whether they want you to make adjustments? What's the time frame going forward?
So the other states have experienced receiving a call, I think, from the very gentleman that you both met at, or heard from at NASB. And they've had personal calls to kind of walk through the plan and get any questions answered that they still have concerns about. And then they deliberate a little more. It goes to a peer review committee. So it is reviewed outside the department. It takes another lens from administration in the department to look at it, and then I believe you get preliminary word feedback, right? Mm-hmm. And then they ask you to respond to the feedback, and then it's approved. So we sort of see these chunks coming out of 4 get approved, and then maybe another couple get approved. So it seems like it's been about a month and a half to 2 months after submission. Does that sound right?
Maybe 3.
3 months.
They start to provide initial feedback.
Yeah.
Okay. Board Member Cannon, did you have a follow-up, or were you
So it'd
good?
be nice by the end of the year, Member Cannon, that we hear back.
Yeah.
Okay. Board Member Lisa Cummins?
So let's play the worst case scenario. They say no, and they send it back to us, and they don't fund, or they won't fund, or they threaten to pull the funding. What happens then?
Yeah,
They go to the legislature?
well.
We will.
We would. And
Superintendent?
might I just provide a caveat here as well, that we have yet to see come out of Congress, of both houses, whether or not we're going to get funding. For example, Title IIA was on the chopping block in the, we're calling it the skinny budget, but I'm not sure I ever saw a fat budget. But the second iteration of a proposed budget, it just passed the Senate Appropriation Committee to be funded at, I don't remember the exact amount, but it close to being fully funded from what was asked for. And now it goes to the other side to deliberate. And so we're saying 123 million, which has been our predicted share, but we're not certain that all of those titles will be funded. So we're basing this plan as if they were to be
Are funding
funded,
it.
right?
So I
So if
kn-
it doesn't get funded, or even one of those titles pops out of the budget, we would certainly alert you, and then it would be up to this body to direct staff or determine what the next step is. Do we just eliminate some programs? Do we go to the legislature and ask for a supplemental? Do your priorities shift? So all of that is up in the air.
So I know the debt ceiling was raised for at least 3 more months, and that won't reflect anything going in the future until the budget's been fixed. Is that correct?
Are you asking us to predict what this
Yes.
Congress and President
No.
will do?
No, well, I'm Congress, not president. I mean, let's be clear. No, I'm just trying. I am trying to measure ahead, and plan for Plan B and C. Because DC doesn't have their act together, and we need to. School's going to continue on, whether they're aware or not. So do we have provisions in place to go forward and help? And have we already been talking with legislators and saying, this is what we're going through right now? Are they aware?
We did mention it at ed interim, always on provisional funding and provision and plan getting passed, et cetera, that there are programs that wouldn't exist and students who wouldn't be served if we didn't have the funding. So we've laid that out there.
And did they respond at all?
No,
Or did
Well,
they just look at you and
Nodded
nod?
and understood, yeah.
not
Yep.
officially. If I might just
Okay.
interject in this, this has been a topic for years, and the best way to mitigate this is, it's very difficult to second guess and put all these strategies and plans. We're almost at the mercy of the funding source, but as it comes to us, we're going to be reactive. So as soon as we have a challenge, then we know we already have a mechanism in place with our education partners on the funding side, which is the legislature. Then we'll go and
I understand
They
that.
want to act based on results.
Sure.
And if we have a federal shortfall of something, then
Well, and
we will talk, and then we go and move, and then they have processes.
I
too.
think,
There isn't a contingency
Sure.
already established. To answer your question,
no, I appreciate that, Chair. I'm pointing, I guess what I'm pointing out is that I'd rather see Utah be a proactive state and be prepared, because that's our heritage talking, ready to act if the federal government is not. And instead of reactive, and be proactive. And I think that's partially the call to Vice Chair Member Ellis's point, that we are not under the federal government's whim of coming and going, and whether or not they can or won't or will, or probably not fund for this next year, whatever the political winds may be. So I think we really need to start talking to the legislators and being more proactive. Maybe as board members, we can start doing that for sure. Getting the ball rolling, talking to our constituents. We've got to be prepared for this.
okay. Board Member Reby.
I would like to support this motion because I appreciate that you have addressed every title program and every part program. When we create a title program, we have identified a need, and we've identified a way to approach this need. So thank you for honoring every title program and each part of those title programs. So I support this ESSA plan.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table and second to approve the ESSA state plan. Not seeing any further comments, so, I do now. Vice Chair Brittany Cummins.
I just want to make sure that this motion, and I don't know if it would take an amendment to the motion, if I can even amend my own motion, but that this motion includes that they have permission to submit the plan as well as make any technical changes that may need to take place, like between now and submission.
Which, to respond to that, they already have that latitude, but if something significant is required to change, then it has to come back to us to change. So that's been implied in the past, and I think it will continue on. I'm not seeing any other comments. Let's vote to the motion. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Will the nays raise? We have them. I'm seeing 1, 2, 3. So the motion passes. Thank you.
If I may take point of privilege, sir, I just want to acknowledge that it's one thing for us to work on this plan, create policy, and take input. You're going to celebrate tonight Teachers of the Year, and it's really the teachers, the educators in the schools who will be asked to implement the things that this funds. So I want to give a shout out to all the educators who will be called on to continue to support students and use the funding that's outlined in this plan, and thank Robert Austin on staff for his work on Teacher of the Year. I will miss this banquet, and it's my favorite thing to do all year long, and so I feel badly about missing it, but celebration of teachers tonight in lieu of what we just talked about. So thank you to the teachers.
Okay, thank you.